All right, so let's go ahead and jump into making our buttons into components. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use one of these buttons to create a master component and then create instances of it everywhere where we're using the button. So let's go ahead and use the Option key or the Alt key and drag one copy up here. Let's just go ahead and just drag it here. And again, we can create components by coming up here and clicking create component. And so now that's a button component that we have. It's called a login button right now because that's the name that we had for it before. But let's go ahead and just change this to button. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select my button component here, use Command C. I'm going to select login here, the frame, and I'm just going to go ahead and paste it here. Let's go ahead and just align that with where we had our original button here. And then let's go ahead and just find that login button in our frames and delete it. And I'm just going to go ahead and bring this down to right below my password button. And while we're in here, let's go ahead and just move this forgot password right after password and the terms of service all the way down right on top of my background. Just to kind of reorganize some of our layers here. You don't have to do this, but I always like to keep my layers organized here. So now this is an instance of that button. What we can do here, we can go ahead and use the Option key again to create another instance. And let's go ahead and change the name of this one or the text for this one to sign up with email, just like we have down here. Let's go ahead and align that as well, using the arrow keys to make sure we got it right. And then let's go ahead and similarly delete our sign up button here and move down this sign up button here, right here. Let's go ahead and do the same for this last button here. This time I'm going to use Command D and then do sign up, or let's actually do sign in with Google. Now I had a white background here before, so to change my color I can still go ahead and select this, and right now it has primary color selected, but if you want to change that you can just go ahead and do detach style. That will let you choose your own color. And then of course I need to go down here to my font or my text here and change it to black, just like we had it before. And then of course let's go ahead and delete the other copy that we had right below it. Delete. And let's just collapse this and bring it right below the other one so the order makes sense. And there we go. So now if I go to my master button component here, if I go ahead and decide to, using Command B, I decide to bolden the text, you see my other buttons have a bold text now. If I go in here, if I go back in here and double click in to choose my text, and let's say I choose a size of 16 and go back, you see my size have increased here. So for now we're going to go ahead and actually unbold it. So we're going to go ahead and actually select our text here and maybe do a medium font weight here, and then go ahead and see our change over there. Cool. So now over here we're good. We have our buttons and these are all instances. One thing I want to show you here is that we made a change to our sign in with Google here. So what we actually did over here is that we overrided that property of that background color here from the master component, which is blue, and then we changed it to the white. So let's say at some point I decided to make this button look like the rest. If I want to change everything altogether, I can go ahead and select it, go to my panel right here, and then do reset overrides from here. and that will give me exactly what that master component looked like. Then I can go ahead and change the text here. So let's Command Z here. Let's say you only want to change the fill back to the original color. So then you can double click into here and select your rectangle here. Make sure you have it selected. And then do the same thing, but this time instead of reset overrides, you can do reset fill. And so that will just get the fill that we had from the master component. Otherwise, you can go ahead and just leave that like this, which is the overridden properties for this button. We're going to do two more really quick things here just to wrap components up. We're going to go ahead and so over here, as you can see, it's getting a little bit messy. Typically, we want to have our components and things such as color schemes on a separate page in our design, so it doesn't kind of make our workspace busy here. So Figma lets you create multiple pages inside of your file by just going up here to where it says page 1 right now. This is currently the page that we're on. It's called page 1. But we can go ahead and rename it to, let's do mockups. And then let's go ahead and create another page by clicking the plus icon here and doing maybe components. And then go ahead and click plus, and let's just do another one for styles. So let's go ahead into our mockup. Let's go ahead and just select the color scheme group here and use Command X. Go back to styles. Let's paste that in here. Cool. And then now let's go back to mockups. Select the two components we have here. Use Command X again to cut. Then go here to our components page and paste them here. There we go. Cool. So now I want to do another thing here with the button component. Typically buttons have multiple states. So we have a button that might be disabled. So this can tell the user that right now they can't use that button. And then we have a button usually in an enabled state. So a button like this usually tells the user that it's enabled. But what if we want to create another type of button that tells users that the button is disabled? So to do that, we're going to go ahead and use Alt and drag an instance away from the component here. And then actually we're gonna turn this instance into a component itself by creating a component. In the layers here, let's go ahead and rename this button to disabled and the other one to enabled. So make sure to follow this convention here, button / enabled, and then button / disabled for the bottom one here. So let's go ahead and select this disabled button here. Let's go ahead and first detach the style here and then change the fill of the button to maybe I think a nice kind of gray here would work. Let's do this color right here, A9, A9, A9. And one last thing I'm going to quickly do in here, I'm going to go ahead and just change the text here. And as you can see, now it's changed in the other button as well. And the reason for that is that we've turned an instance of this button into a component. So it's still related to this button and the changes that we make to it. So again, make sure this one's called button / disabled and the other one button / enabled. I'll show you in a second why that's important. So now if you go back to your mockup page here, that looks a lot cleaner, by the way. Now you'll see my text here has changed back to button. We need to change this to login. That's because we didn't overwrite the text to login. We just used whatever the component had. So when we changed it to button, it changed the text here as well. But the other one stayed the same because we did make that override for the text here. Now, if I select a button and go to the instance panel here, I can actually go ahead and choose disabled or enabled. How cool is that? We forgot to do one last thing here, and that has to do with the tutorial card here, and that's to assign the same button to it as well. So let's go back to components, and then let's go ahead and copy this component, and then go ahead inside of a tutorial card, paste. And so now we have an instance of that button. So we're just going to go ahead and overwrite the width here to 253 pixels as well. And go ahead and put this on top of the other one. And let's go ahead and delete the next button from our component here. And then before we move forward, let's do next here, just because most of my components will use a next button, except for the very last page of the tutorial. We're just going to change that to done. So let's do that by going back to mockups. And then if I scroll down to the very last page, I can override this button's text by clicking into it and then typing done. And so now you see we have exactly what we want. Now, I know we learned a lot here today, but these are all very important concepts in Figma and very, very powerful and useful tools. And I really want you to get an understanding and really take advantage of it in your own projects. I think we're ready to move on to our payment page, and so we'll do that in the next lesson. All right, I think we're ready to jump into our third page here, the payment page. But before we do that, let's take another quick look at our sketch here. So this is the payment page. It's pretty simple. It just has a title here. And then we have the credit card where the user can input their credit card number and all the other info here. And then they can add the card from here and then go to the next page. It looks pretty straightforward. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm trying to design a new project or a new page, it's a little bit hard to know exactly what we want to put on there, or to even get some inspiration for our project and our own designs. Of course, we can use similar apps that we're designing and play around with those apps, but that can be really tedious. So that's why I'm going to show you this cool website here called Patterns. You can head on over to PTTRNS.com to access it, and it's super cool. Essentially, it's just kind of like Pinterest, but for app design. So it shows you a lot of interesting inspirations that you can take from kind of some of the hot apps on the market. They even have categories here. So based on the page that you're designing, you can go in here and get inspiration. Let's go ahead and select this purchase tab here to see some inspiration from different apps and different companies. For example, there's Uber's payment page here. We already have a design in mind in terms of my own sketch here. But let's go ahead and see what we need. So we need a card number, we need an expiry date, a CVV, country and zip code. So I think generally these first three fields are required and the other ones are kind of optional. But of course, if the client wants us, we can definitely put those in our design in the future as well. But for now, let's focus on just putting these three required fields. So let's go back here to my payments page here in Figma. I'm going to use the text key and go ahead and just create some notes here. So payment requirements. Let's go ahead and use left align and just move that here. So we need the credit card number here. We need the CVV and then expiry date. This is a good way to make notes and remember to add things to your page here. So let's go ahead and select our frame here, and then first we want text in here. So let's do text, and then let's do add payment. Let's go ahead and select font size of 26, and then just go ahead and move that up here. You want to do 50. I think that looks good for now. Let's just zoom in here and create a rectangle for our credit card. And I think that's good here. I want to maintain a spacing of 40 from each side, or let's actually do 43. Expand that here to maybe 185. Let's go ahead and set a nice gradient fill. Let's do linear for the background here. And I'm going to go ahead and bring this up a little bit here first. Let's choose local colors. So that's the colors that we're using in our project here. Let's do this one for the top. And then the same thing for the bottom, but we'll do a little bit darker maybe. And then we'll have it start from here to maybe here. Let's go ahead and close that up here. And let's go ahead and round the borders to maybe 18 here. I think that looks good. Why don't we go ahead and just center this text here? I think that looks good. Create another text. And let's just go ahead and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 space 5, 6, 7, 8 space 9, 0, 1, 2 space 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm just repeating some numbers here. I'm gonna add some double spaces in here instead of just one space, just to add some spacing between these every 4 digits. Let's go ahead and select the whole text field and change the fill to white. And then let's move it over here. Let's go ahead and make it bold and change the font size to 16. Do a spacing of 30 would be good. Let's try 18 for the font size. That's even better. Move it up a little bit. Let's actually go over here to letter spacing and add a letter spacing of, let's do 2%. That looks good. That just adds a little bit of spacing between each one of my digits here. I'm going to use Command D to duplicate that here. And then what do we want next? We want the expiry date. So let's do month, year, just as a placeholder here. And move that down here. And then let's just go ahead and duplicate this here and do CVV. Just move it all the way to the right. I think that's starting to come together. Just going to move it around a little bit. Move these up a little bit. I think that looks good. I have a feeling blue would look better for the gradient here. So why don't we go ahead and actually change our colors from the orange to blue. Remember, you can always do this with your design. There's really no right or wrong here. It's just really a matter of what looks better to you. So go ahead and experiment with different options. You don't have to stick to the ones that we're working with here. If you want to use another type of page, by all means, go ahead and do that. Now let's go ahead and just select everything here and use Command G to group them. Rename this to credit card. And let's go ahead to the effects panel here and add an effect of drop shadow. And for this one, I want to do maybe a Y of 5. Let's do a blur of 10. Let's try 12. Do an opacity of 20% so it's not too visible. Let's go ahead and add another shadow as well. Let's do a blur of 20 here and a Y of 8. And then change the opacity to maybe 15% or actually 5% here. Let's try 8%. I think that looks good. So we're just missing a button here. So as you remember, we created our buttons as a component, but we placed it in another page here in the components page. You don't actually have to go there to access it. If you go to the assets tab over here, you'll see all your components here. And I have my buttons as well, both the disabled version and the enabled one. So why don't we just use the enabled one here for now. And it just beautifully pops into place here. Let's make sure it's aligned in the center. Let's go ahead and also make sure everything else is aligned in the center as well. And it looks like it is. Let's change this button text to add card. And let's just change this to payment here to make it a little bit more simple. And then, of course, let's go ahead and center it. I think that looks pretty good. So there we have it. That's our payment page. We can definitely come back later and then polish things up here once we're done with everything else. All right, so in the last lesson, we put together our payment page. And now in this lesson, we're going to learn what constraints are. So essentially, up until now, we've been making our designs here, assuming that they'll always be run on an iPhone 11 size. And we've been using only one size for our frames here. In other words, we've been placing our layers and objects here, assuming that it will only be run on an iPhone 11 display. So let's say the client at some point decides to design or see their designs on an iPhone 11 Pro Max here. And as you can see, not much will happen. The frame will just expand, but our designs will stay the same size. And again, that's because we've been designing it in relation to only an iPhone 11 Pro size here. So that's where constraints come in. Constraints allow us to make our designs responsive so they work no matter what frame or what environment they're in. In order to add constraints here, first let's go ahead and just undo that so we have our original size here. And we're going to focus on our login page first. So I'm just going to zoom in using Z and scroll here. So let's go ahead and just focus on adding constraints to this page, and then we'll go ahead and add it everywhere else as well. But let's first understand what constraints are. So with any object selected, you can access constraints by going to the properties panel here and then finding constraints. You can see right now by default, I have a constraint of top and left. And you can see it's top left because these two markers here on the constraint are blue and the other ones are just black. So this field here is being constrained to the left and the top, which is by default what happens with every object. But in fact, what we want to do is go ahead and constrain it to the left and the right here so that if the frame gets bigger or smaller, the field will react to that. So right now, if I make my frame smaller, the field won't react to that. So in order to make it react and properly size depending on the screen size here, let's go ahead and have it selected and then go over here. Let's remove the top constraint. So let's remove the top constraint by going here and just doing center, because we want to keep this element in the center of our page and not necessarily constrained by the top. And then let's go ahead and also do left and right here. So now to actually see that in action, I'm going to resize my frame, making it smaller. And now you'll notice my field is actually resizing here, except there's a little something weird going on with this icon over here. So let's go ahead and add some constraint to this icon as well. The elements of a group themselves have certain constraints to it that you can also change. So if I double click into here to select my icon, and you'll notice it has a left and right constraint, but for the icon itself, we just want to do a left constraint because we just want to constrain it to the left side of this field and not the right. And so now if I resize my frame, you see it works as it should. So let's go ahead and apply those constraints to some of the elements in this page, and we'll go ahead and then apply it to other pages as well. Again, let's work our way from the top to the bottom. So let's do this button here. We want to do a top and a right constraint here because we want that button to be constrained to the right side and not the left. Our logo here should just remain in the center. And let's actually make this center as well. Let's go to the password group and make it left and right and center. And then again, jump in here and make that change to be only left for our icon here. Forgot password should be constrained to the right and center. The login button should have a constraint of left and right, and again center in terms of the vertical constraint. Let's go ahead and just multi-select by using shift all of these components here, all of these objects here, because they're going to have the same constraint. We're going to do left and right, and then we're going to do center. Except for this terms here, we want to go ahead and click this one and do a bottom constraint because we want it to actually stick to the bottom. I think we just forgot one thing. Let's open our layers panel here. If you remember, we locked our background layer, so we can't edit it until we go into our layers and then unlock it. And for my background here, make sure you have it selected. We want to do a constraint of left and right and top and bottom. So this way it's filling the whole size of the screen. So now I'm going to lock it again and go ahead and collapse my frame. So now if the client, let's say, decides to go with the iPhone 11 Pro Max for their designs here, they can do that. And boom, as you can see, the frame is completely responsive and it resized for that iPhone size. And then if I go ahead and change the frame, let's say to an iPad mini even, you can see it does work. Although you'd probably want to make some tweaks, such as resizing these fields and buttons because that's way too large for an iPad app. But here we're just designing for mobiles. So let's go ahead and just hit Command Z and then go ahead and select the frame and make sure we choose the iPhone 11 Pro here, iPhone 11 Pro here. And I'm just going to go ahead and put this back here. That looks good. Cool. So as an exercise, I want you to go ahead and apply those constraints to the other pages that we have here. So go ahead and as an experiment, apply those constraints to the tutorial pages as well as your payment page. And then in the next lesson, we'll do it together as well. All right, so if you've been following along so far, we added some constraints to our login page here. So now, no matter what size the frame here is, if I change it around, it will go ahead and constrain all the elements inside to the sides and the top and the bottom. So that will help us create some really responsive design. And then I gave you an exercise to go ahead and do that for the other pages here. So we're going to do that together here as well. First, I want to start with my tutorial steps, but I'm going to actually go ahead and replace that group that we inserted in the background here and actually use an image instead because that's a lot easier to control with constraints for the purpose that we're using it here in our mockups. So let's go ahead and select the login page here and then go all the way down to export. Let's go ahead and add an export here and just choose PNG for your file type and then go ahead and export login. It will ask you where you want to save it. So I'm just going to save it in my downloads. So once I've done that there, I'm going to go ahead and just drag it from my downloads folder right into this tutorial page. Then go ahead and just center it along. And then let's go ahead and add a constraint of left and right and top and bottom. This way it will keep this image attached to all edges no matter how we resize it. Of course, we want to go ahead and just move this all the way to the bottom where we have our rectangle right below it. And then we don't need this group 1 here anymore, so let's delete it. And once you do that, I'm going to go ahead and apply the same constraint to the rectangle which we're using for our effect here, right, the blur. So let's go ahead and just apply the constraint of top, left, and right, and also top and bottom. And then we can go ahead and just group these two together and go ahead and just lock it just to make things easier. So now if I resize this page or this frame over here, you'll see it will go ahead and keep the image for the background in the proper place, but the tutorial card here isn't constrained properly. So let's select the instance of the tutorial card here and then add a constraint of center. So now if I do the same thing here, it will go ahead and maintain the size here. I'm just going to select iPhone 11 Pro again. So now that works, I'm going to quickly apply the same constraints here to the other 2 tutorial pages. So let's go ahead and select this group, copy it, come here to my tutorial 2, paste that in, bring it down here, delete the other 2. The beauty of it is that when you copy something, the constraints will be copied with it as well, so we don't need to redo that part. Let's copy again. Tutorial 3, do the same thing. Move it down here, delete the other 2. And then all we need to do is again go to the instance here, choose center. So by using center, we'll just maintain the size of this card. So we won't resize it based on the device size. We will just center it according to the screen that we're working with here. Same thing here. So now these pages are all done. And last but not least, let's move on to our payment page here. So this is going to be super simple. For this one, let's go ahead and do center and top. For the card here, we don't want it to resize, so let's choose center and center for this as well. Similar to our tutorial card. And then for the button here, we want to do, let's do left and right and center. Now, if I resize this frame to, let's say, an iPhone 11 Pro Max here, I think that looks good. So there you have it. That's our constraints. And now we've applied it to all the pages we've designed so far. Now, to keep this course concise and to the point, I won't be adding any constraints to each individual page, but at the end, I will include a file that you can download for the final mockup UI, which will include all the constraints applied. So as an exercise, you can definitely apply constraints throughout the whole UI and then go back to that file at the end, just to make sure that you've done it properly.